Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, and all those in the audience and watching around the world who cherish freedom and democracy, thank you for inviting me here today, this very special day for human rights. I'm honored to be with you and to be on the same panel with so many outstanding public servants. As you know, this is not the first time we've come together to show solidarity with the residents of Camp Ashraf. This is not the first time we've come together to speak out on their behalf. This is not the first time we've come together to urge the Obama administration to do the right thing and delist the MEK. We know that the UN Security Council has recently been alerted to the situation at the camp, including the very real possibility of violence. We know about the calculations in Baghdad of Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki, who just last week referred to these residents as terrorists and insurgents, and that he repeated his intention to close the camp by the end of this year. We know that the defenseless residents at Camp Ashraf surrendered all their weapons and placed themselves under the protection of the United States. We also know that the United States does have influence with the Maliki regime in Baghdad. Despite withdrawing all of our combat forces by the end of this year, the U.S. will continue to train Iraqi troops and will continue to provide security, economic, and developmental assistance to Iraq. We have leverage to influence Iraq's behavior if we are willing to use it. The threat to withhold U.S. support and funding for Baghdad would cost us nothing in terms of American lives and money. In his memoirs, former President Bill Clinton recounts in painful detail his deep remorse at standing by and doing nothing. With a few thousand troops and help from our allies, we could have saved lives. The failure to try to stop Rwanda's tragedies became one of the greatest regrets of my presidency. How ironic that President Clinton's wife is now the Secretary of State and has the power to remedy the injustice and pending catastrophe at Camp Ashraf. No one is asking Secretary of State Clinton to send troops or to enlist the help of our European allies. All she has to do is delist the MEK and ensure that the residents are given safe passage out of Iraq. Will she take this decision? And will she take it in the next few weeks before it's too late? Or in a few years' time, will she join with her husband and express remorse at what could have been? Will we be reading a similar passage in her memoirs about how the failure to stop the final assault on Camp Ashraf was one of her greatest regrets during her stewardship of American foreign policy? As we all know, time is short and the need for action is urgent. So what can we do now? We can continue to pressure Prime Minister Maliki to delay closing the camp and allow the UNHCR to do its work. The UNHCR must be allowed to start the process of registering, identifying, and interviewing the residents. The U.S. and the European Union have ways to influence his decision-making, and we know that he can be influenced. We know that he is sensitive to negative publicity by his claiming in an article in the Washington Post this past week that he is seeking a so-called peaceful solution to Camp Ashraf. When he comes to Washington next week, President Obama must tell him to keep the camp open and allow the UNHCR to do their work. We must also continue to publicize the vulnerability of the camp's residents. Silence is the enemy of their safety and their freedom. Earlier this year, the international community came together to protect the residents of Benghazi in Libya from imminent slaughter. They decided that never again would the world stand by and watch the murder of innocent civilians when they could act and save lives. And so, they joined together and invoked the international community's responsibility to protect. If Benghazi, why not Ashraf? The international community has a responsibility to protect the innocent residents at the camp. It is simply not possible to stand by and do nothing. If never again applies to the residents of Benghazi, then it applies to the residents of Camp Ashraf. The international community cannot claim that they do not know the peril the residents of the camp face every day, not after the events of April 8th earlier this year that we saw so vividly on that video a few minutes ago. It's up to us to make sure that all of our voices continue to be heard. Finally, the Obama administration needs to be encouraged to take a more active and aggressive role in pushing back against Iran. We have all seen last month's IAEA report on Iran's ongoing nuclear ambitions, and we have read about the Iranian plot to assassinate the Saudi ambassador in a Washington, D.C. restaurant a few months ago. Dozens of American citizens would have been killed and wounded in this attack if it had been successful. In other words, it was an act of war. As we all know, the United States has a special responsibility to protect the residents at Camp Ashraf. This responsibility doesn't end on December 31st. It doesn't end when the last American soldier leaves Iraq. It ends only when all the residents of the camp are safe and secure and allowed to live their lives in peace and in dignity. The fastest, the easiest, the best way to accomplish this goal is to delist the MEK immediately. Thank you very much.